Welcome to the Visible Art of Translation podcasts. This series of podcasts are part of the EU-funded INCREC project. Our focus is creativity, translation, and technology in literary and audiovisual translation. Our goal with this series is to give visibility to the often invisible skills, role, and voice of professional translators. Thank you, Xènia, for taking the time to come and talk to us. Xènia Dyakonova is a poet, translator, and publisher based in Barcelona and born in St. Petersburg. But Xènia, I would like you to start rather than me do the talking. Tell us a bit about yourself. For example, how did you decide to be a translator and how did you get there?
Well, I started translating when I was a teenager. I was born in Leningrad, that now is called St. Petersburg, and then I spent a couple of years in Spain with my family when I was, I think, 11 or 12. And when we got back to St. Petersburg after the 2 years we had spent in Spain, I felt that I sort of missed Spanish language and especially Spanish poetry, which I had began reading and loving. And just to keep in touch with Spanish culture, with Spanish language, and especially with Spanish poetry, I began translating some of my favorite poets, of the poets I loved in that time. I mean, García Lorca, Vicente Aleixandre, Manuel Alto Laguirre, and some other poets of the 20th century. And I discovered a different way of writing. I mean, I wrote poetry, and I also translated some of my best loved Spanish poets. And I felt that there was a sort of connection between these activities, and that translating poetry and obliging myself to find some new ways of writing in Russian, thanks to the Spanish poets I translated, was extremely interesting and made me enjoy language much more, Russian language and Spanish language. And then I just could not help translating not only Spanish poetry, but also Catalan poetry. When I spent some years in Barcelona, I discovered Catalan poetry, and I started translating Catalan poets into Russian, which is my native tongue. But then, since I live in Barcelona and I earn my living translating, I felt that it was much easier to get some commitments, not for translating from Catalan into Russian, but from Russian into Catalan. And well, so it was not my decision to switch from one kind of translation into another, but it was fate, perhaps, who had decided things for me. But I don't complain. I like translating also Russian poetry and Russian prose, and also Polish poetry into Catalan. And for me, it's a way of learning to write poetry, thanks to other voices which inhabit my way of writing.
Very, very interesting. I mean, during this very extensive translation, and of course you are a poet, but as a translator, which one of your translations have you enjoyed the most doing, and why?
Well, I enjoy translating poetry the most. One cannot earn a living translating poetry, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, because if you could do that, perhaps you would know how to do it in a commercial way, and you would not do it according to your heart. So perhaps it's not a tragedy that translating poetry is not a commercial activity. Perhaps it's really better that way. I don't know. It's another discussion, perhaps. But I I enjoy translating Russian poetry into Spanish and Catalan. Some of my best loved Russian poets, such as Boris Pasternak or Nikolai Gumilev, are translated together with my boyfriend, who is Spanish, and his Dominion, his Spanish is much better than mine, but my Russian is better than his. So we are a perfect couple in that sense, and we have had a lot of fun translating, for example, Pasternak's poems, just because, I think translating together is a lot of fun. Uh, Sometimes you quarrel, but you have to survive. And we survived. We are still a couple, and we still translate together, and we still have fun. I also translate Polish poetry, though I'm not a great connoisseur of Polish language. I do love Polish poets and Polish culture and Polish cinema too. Um, but I used to read them in translation. I used to read Polish poets in translation, but then I started learning Polish by myself, and I also took some classes. And now translating my best loved Polish poets for me is a way of learning Polish language, and it's also a way of understanding better the nature of Polish poetry and the nature of each one of these poets. I had a lot of fun translating Adam Zaradziewski's poetry from Polish into Catalan. I always had an English translation um, available, and I looked up a lot of things in the English translation of his poems, and sometimes I also used the Spanish translation, which had been made by another translator, of course. But I'm not ashamed about that. I mean, it's quite normal. And I also think that my translation is sometimes is better, though I really my knowledge of Polish language is passive. I can read Polish, but I cannot speak it. But I think that in translated poetry, it's especially important to have a good knowledge of the target language, and a good knowledge of the rhythm resources of the target language, and also a sort of sensitivity for poetry in the target language. So it's not so important really whether your knowledge of Polish in this case is perfect or not. There are many other things which are much more important.
This is interesting what you say about the rhythm. So would you say that the main difficulties that you have found when translating literary texts or poetry is precisely this rhythm, this music, or what is difficult when doing this type of translations?
Yes, the rhythm issue is pretty difficult always, because there are many ways of creating rhythm in poetry, not only meter and rhyme, which are the classical resources and which are still very useful for poets and for translators, but rhythm is not only this. Every poet has his own way of being rhythmical, and so I think that's the main difficulty of translating poetry, being able to to make the original rhythm live in the poem, in the translated poem, in the poem, and the well, just for example, if it's a Polish poem, it has its rhythm, which depends on Polish language, on the stress, which falls always on the penultimate syllable of every word. And when you translate into Catalan, for example, the stress in Catalan words can be on other syllables. And so the music of the language is different. And finding this kind of equilibrium,
the balance between
exactly. So, finding a sort of balance between the rhythm of the original poem and the rhythm of the poem of your poem, of the poem in the target language, is always a struggle.
Yeah.
And also there is a lot of cultural issues. I mean, when I translate Adam Darajewski's poetry, for example, I know that there are some quotations in his poems. He quotes other Polish poets, or sometimes he also quotes poets from other countries and other languages, but he quotes them translated into Polish, and there is always some kind of a lot of mirrors, so to say.
Yes.
And so you have to find a way to show all these mirrors to the reader, and do something with those quotations which the Catalan reader, for example, doesn't understand. You have to decide whether you find some quotations in Catalan that Catalan readers might understand and enjoy or not. There is always the issue of cultural translations, not just linguistical translation, but also translations of all the culture that you can find beyond poetry and beyond every poem you translate.
Yeah, and would you say, I mean, in this sense, I'm talking about cultural references, but this is only an example. How would you define then creativity in the translation that you do? What is for you creativity in translation?
Well, I used to I used to explain this issue with a metaphor.
Okay.
It's the most easy way for me. Well, when I translate poetry, I have to save the soul of the poem I translate, but I cannot save the body, because the body is the original language, the source language, and so I have to find a new body in the target language. I have to find a new body for the same soul, the soul of the poem. So for me, that's the way. Also, that could be a definition of being creative, translating poetry, being able to find a new body for the same soul, or different new bodies, because you can make different translations of the same poem, and they can be pretty good, all of them. So one different body or many different bodies for the same soul, or the original soul of the poem.
And I guess through time you have reincarnations as well. Then, as if you translate a poet, from the 14th century, then you're in a way reincarnating at different times as a translator.
Yes, that's it. I also love the metaphor of reincarnation.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. I wasn't expecting that answer, but it's beautiful. So to get a bit more maybe technical, but you don't have to. But in this creative process, in your own words or your own mind, how does it work? Maybe cognitively, but also, what are the steps that you take or that you experience when you are being creative when translating a poem, for example, or any other type of text?
Well, I think it's difficult to talk about that because it's a rather unconscious process to or the most beautiful things in translating poetry have to do with your unconscious way of thinking and acting. So it's hidden somewhere in your brain, and you have the key. I always when I translate poetry, I always start making a scheme of the rhythm of the original poem. If it's a poem with meter and rhyme, then I just write down a couple of things I have to. I have to keep, I have to maintain in my translation regarding meter and rhyme, and then I start. Sometimes I start translating my favorite stanza of the poem or my favorite image or something which is especially attractive for me, just because I know that I will be inspired translating the most beautiful image of the poem, or perhaps the most difficult sentence or the most difficult fragment, rhythmical fragment of the poem. Sometimes starting with the most difficult part is quite challenging for me. I know that if I can overcome that, I will finish the poem. So it's a kind of, well, you have to fool yourself into translation. I don't know if it makes sense in English, but I hope it does.
So you fool yourself into translation in which sense exactly? Why do you say fool yourself?
Because sometimes if you are truly honest with yourself, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
For example, if I were truly honest with myself when translating Polish poetry, I could say, well, you really don't know Polish. You can read it with a dictionary, but you are not a real translator from Polish because you have to study this language thoroughly, and you have to spend years doing that, and then you will be able to translate Polish poetry. And if I said that to myself, I would have been quite honest, but then I would have not translated my favorite Polish poets.
There is always this thing of the impossibility of translation, right? This eternal debate between impossibility
Yes.
and people or scholars that say, well, it's not true, and so we are always in between these two worlds, I guess, the possible and the impossible.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have to realize that it's always impossible, but you have to try to do something impossible every time you try to translate a poem.
Since in these podcasts we also talk about technology. And
Yeah.
I like your metaphor about the body and soul, because in a way, my idea of machine translation is that it's more preoccupied with the body and not so much with the soul, because of the obvious, way in which this technology is built. However, what tools do you use to translate in the internet, or do you use Google Translator or DeepL or any other tool to help you, or to? I'm interested to know your opinion.
Yes, I do use especially DeepL and sometimes Google Translator, especially when I translate Polish poetry, because as you know, um, my Polish is very poor. So these tools sometimes help me to understand not only the meaning of the words, but also the syntax, which is not always easy in Polish, and especially in DeepL. DeepL sometimes offers you different solutions, right? And different options of translation, and that's very good. That's very useful. So I do use these tools just to understand the original text better. And of course, I use internet and Wikipedia and every kind of information I can find on internet regarding the text I'm translating is always very useful and interesting. But of course, internet and detail and Google Translator cannot help me to find the way of being funny in my translation, or the way of being gracious, the way of being charming. I mean, trying to find some words or combinations of words which could transmit the charm of the original. So that's the sole issue, which the machine cannot help you. You have to do it yourself. But I think my activity as a translator would be much more difficult and depressing too, without Google and without DeepL and without internet.
And I'm curious now, because you speak well 3 languages, and you speak others. So when you use DeepL, say for example, if you're translating into, say, I don't know, Catalan or Russian or whatever the combination, what do you use? What language combinations do you use? Like, you translate from Polish into Russian and then Russian into Catalan, or do you go directly Polish-Catalan?
Well, sometimes I tried Polish Catalan, but the results were not very good. So I usually translate whatever into English first.
So you use English as the pivot. Yeah.
Yes. And I usually, for example, if it's a Polish text, I use DeepL for Polish English translation, and then and that's enough for me for understanding the text.
Exactly.
And then I once after understanding the text, I can translate it in my mind into Catalan, for example, or into Spanish. So it's an intermediate phase of translation.
So you use machine translation more for clarification, in a way, in a like
Exactly.
pre-production phase, let's say.
Yes.
But do you think using machine translation affects, in a way, your creativity?
Oh, well, of course, it makes me feel just more modest.
That's funny because some of the students, when they are better, my translation students, sometimes when they are better than the machine, they feel better about themselves because they say, "Oh, I can correct the machine." So in your case, is the other way around.
It's the other way around because I just realized that the machine is always smarter, and you have to accept it.
Would it happen to you if it was Russian, if it was Russian Catalan or Catalan Russian or Spanish Russian?
Yeah, I don't know really. For the moment, the machine translation into Russian is very bad.
Okay.
As far as I know. And the machine is not able just to decline the words and to decline them correctly. I mean, so there is no sense in comparing this kind of very bad translations, very poor results with with the language, with my Russian, just because it's my native language. So, I think it's a question of time, and perhaps in some years, the translation into Russian and from Russian will get better, hopefully.
Yeah. So if that's the case, if it gets better, what do you think the reading experience could potentially be for a reader if machine translation is used?
Well, it's difficult to generalize.
Yeah.
But especially regarding poetry, because I cannot really imagine a good machine translation of poetry. But I'm sure that perhaps in a couple of years, or perhaps in 10 years, if I still if I go on teaching poetry as I do now, if I make my students choose between a machine translation of a poem and a professional, so to say, a good human translation of the same poem, perhaps my students will say that they prefer the machine translation. Not now, but perhaps in 10 years or in 20 years. And just perhaps the machine will be more correct in the grammatical sense of the language, and perhaps human translators sometimes need to force to break some grammatical rules of the target language to make the translation of the poem more expressive, more brilliant, and it's a very subtle, a very it's an artistic issue. It has nothing to do with mastering grammar and syntax.
With accuracy, it's more to do with beauty in this sense.
Exactly, beauty. I have not used this word yet, but I really always talk about beauty when I talk about translating poetry. For me, the most important thing is to recreate in some way the beauty of the original poem. Sometimes we can use another a metaphor to explain it, a much more banal metaphor. Well, sometimes when you listen to a song, you can like the song, though you don't understand the words. You just enjoy the music, but you don't understand the words. But never mind, you can imagine something. You can imagine the sense of these words, or just invent your own interpretation of the words, though you don't understand them. So the music in a song is much more powerful and important than words. And sometimes when you translate poetry, you have to make an effort to keep this music, and you have to change the words entirely.
Yeah.
And well, sometimes it's a kind of sacrifice. You have just to assume, and when you assume it, if you are able to keep this music, though sometimes you have to sacrifice sacrifice the original words. Well, if the new words you find are not uh, totally incomprehensible, totally strange, totally different from the spirit of the original poem, then it can work.
But you mentioned that it would be your students that would not be able to distinguish maybe in the future. But do you think poets would?
I hope so. If poets don't, well, we can just, I don't know, go to another planet, perhaps, move to another planet.
If we are not already in another planet, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or in another world, perhaps, where there are only souls and no bodies.
Exactly. I like that. So if you were, in a way, a creator of technology, what would you like to have if you could choose? What technology would you like to have?
Well, I really don't know, because technology is not my forte. but I just would like to have good dictionaries, either paper dictionaries or online dictionaries, both of them. And really, there are some. Well, for example, there is no Russian Catalan dictionary good enough. There is a dictionary, but it's not good, and it's sort of old-fashioned, yeah, because the Catalan language changed a lot, or at least that literary Catalan language changed a lot since the publication, since the date of the publication of this dictionary in the 80s, I think. So that's particularly important when we talk about Catalan translations, because Catalan language is changing every time, every year, and the authors of the dictionary should be sensitive to these changes, and so we need a new dictionary, a new Russian Catalan dictionary. And I guess that with other Slav languages, it's the same. I don't think the Polish Catalan dictionary is good either. So I would just improve the dictionaries.
Yeah, that's going back to basics here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So as you know, our profession is not very well known, so much so that now when people talk sometimes about translate, they refer to Google Translate, or if you Google Translate, they talk about machine translation and not translators. So how would you explain to our listeners that are not translators, hopefully some of them are not, how would you explain what we do?
Well, I think I will try to use a definition, a very funny and beautiful definition of our common friend Marta Pera said that translating is like cooking, and sometimes if you want to cook a dish, for example, if you live in Spain and you want to cook a Russian dish, you don't have Russian ingredients because you don't live in Russia. So you have to use the ingredients you can find Spain, in the country where you live in. So you have to be able to cook the Russian dish with Spanish ingredients. And if you're able to do that, then you're a good translator.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. And if machine translation, as people, not people, but part of the media implies recently with all these new models like GPT and that professional translators will be replaced, what would a world without translators, professional translators, look like?
Well, I think it would look like the Tower of Babel from the Bible. I mean, you remember the story, no? A lot of people are trying to reach God, building a tower, and God punished them, making them speak different languages so that they could not understand each other. So that would be a word without translators.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Xènia. Thank you again to our invited speaker and to our listeners. Thank you for being there, and feel free to share our podcasts with your family, friends, and colleagues. This is part of a series of podcasts of the EU-funded INCREC project. So follow us for more episodes and please share your comments on this platform. See you next time.